Have you ever stood in a crowded room, surrounded by laughter and conversation, only to feel like you were watching everything through a thick pane of glass, as if you could see the performance, hear the words, even participate when necessary, but something fundamental had shifted in your perception that made it impossible to truly belong to that reality anymore? This is not a story about superiority or spiritual arrogance. This is about one of the most devastating and beautiful transitions a human being can experience. The moment when you begin to see layers of existence that remain invisible to almost everyone around you, and how that gift can feel like the loneliest curse imaginable. There is a particular type of seeing that emerges during spiritual awakening, a perception that penetrates beyond the surface of things and reveals the intricate web of illusions that most people navigate without ever questioning. It begins subtly, perhaps with moments where you notice the artificial nature of social interactions, the way people perform their roles without awareness, or the strange emptiness behind activities that once brought meaning. But as this perception deepens, as your inner vision becomes more acute, you discover that you are witnessing a reality that feels increasingly foreign to those closest to you. The conversations that once engaged you now seem hollow. The concerns that animate others feel trivial, and the values that govern mainstream society appear to be based on assumptions so fragile they could dissolve with a single honest question. Imagine a butterfly trying to explain flight to a caterpillar. The caterpillar, wrapped in its familiar world of leaves and branches, cannot conceive of soaring through open air, of seeing the garden from above, of experiencing the freedom that comes with wings. But the butterfly, having undergone complete metamorphosis, can never again perceive the world through the limited perspective of crawling along surfaces. This is the predicament of expanded consciousness. Once you have glimpsed the broader landscape of reality, once you have experienced states of awareness that transcend ordinary perception, you find yourself in the peculiar position of being unable to unsee what you have seen, unable to unfeel what you have felt, unable to unknow what you now know. The tragedy is not in the seeing itself, but in the profound isolation that accompanies this expanded awareness. You look at your family during holiday gatherings and realize they are having entirely different conversations than the ones you are hearing. They speak of career advancement, material acquisitions, social status, and entertainment, while you perceive the desperate hunger for meaning that underlies their words, the quiet desperation masked by busyness, the spiritual emptiness they have learned to ignore so completely they no longer recognize it as emptiness. You want to reach out, to share what you see, to offer the insights that have transformed your own understanding, but you quickly learn that such attempts often result in discomfort, dismissal, or worse, the kind of patronizing concern reserved for those who are perceived as having lost their grip on reality. This expanded perception extends beyond human interactions into the very fabric of society itself. You begin to see through the elaborate constructions that hold civilization together, recognizing them as collective agreements rather than absolute truths. The financial systems that create artificial scarcity in a world of abundance, the political structures that maintain division while claiming to seek unity, the educational systems that prioritize conformity over creativity, the religious institutions that often obscure the very spiritual truths they claim to protect. All of these reveal themselves as temporary arrangements held in place by collective belief rather than inherent necessity. But while this understanding brings a certain freedom, it also creates the disorienting experience of living as a conscious being within unconscious systems, of participating in structures you no longer believe in, while surrounded by people who take them as seriously as natural laws. I want to pause for a moment and ask you directly, when was the first time you realized that you were seeing something that everyone around you was missing? That moment when you understood that your perception had shifted so fundamentally that you could no longer take for granted the shared reality that binds most people together? Was it during meditation when you glimpsed the interconnected nature of all existence? Was it in a moment of crisis when the artificial structures of your life collapsed and revealed something more authentic underneath? Or was it a gradual awakening, a slow recognition that the world you had been taught to see was only one layer of a much more complex reality? I know this recognition can feel like a form of madness. You question your own sanity because everyone else seems so certain about things that now appear obviously constructed and temporary. You wonder if perhaps you are the one who has lost touch with reality, rather than the one who has finally begun to see it clearly. The most painful part is not the confusion itself, but the profound loneliness that comes with carrying insights that cannot be easily shared, with seeing connections that others dismiss as imagination, with feeling the pulse of something vast and sacred in a world that has forgotten how to recognize the sacred. I want you to know that your perception is not a form of mental illness or spiritual delusion. What you are experiencing is the natural result of consciousness expanding beyond the boundaries that once contained it. Your isolation is not evidence that you are wrong, but rather confirmation that you are accessing levels of awareness that remain largely unexplored in our current culture. The discomfort you feel is not your individual pathology, but the inevitable friction that occurs when an awakening consciousness attempts to function within systems designed for sleeping minds. And that is why I invite you to share a piece of your journey in the comments below. Not because misery loves company, but because recognition creates healing. You can simply copy this phrase and complete it. I knew I was seeing differently when blank. Your words might be the confirmation someone desperately needs to continue their own exploration, the validation that prevents another seeker from concluding they are losing their mind. When we acknowledge our expanded perception, we create invisible threads that connect awakening beings across the apparent isolation of this experience. We form a silent network of consciousness that exists parallel to ordinary social structures, a community of recognition that transcends physical proximity. This community matters because the journey of expanded awareness is not meant to be traveled in complete solitude. While it is true that certain aspects of awakening can only be experienced individually, the integration and expression of these insights benefits enormously from connection with others who have undergone similar transformations. Like radio frequencies that can only communicate with receivers tuned to the same wavelength, awakening beings need each other to fully understand and articulate the realities they are perceiving. Now, let us continue exploring what it means to carry this burden and gift of expanded sight, and how to navigate the complex terrain between ordinary and expanded consciousness without losing your authentic connection to either. The deeper you move into expanded awareness, the more you realize that the very nature of destruction and creation are intimately intertwined. What feels like the destruction of your previous worldview is simultaneously the creation of a more comprehensive understanding. What appears to be the dissolution of your connection to others is actually the emergence of a more authentic way of relating. The personality structures that once defined your identity must partially dissolve to make room for something more fluid and responsive. This process is neither comfortable nor predictable, and it rarely follows the timelines we might prefer. There is a particular kind of grief that accompanies this transformation, a mourning for the simplicity of unconscious living. You remember when problems felt solvable, when authorities could be trusted, when entertainment was entertaining, when the future seemed predictable and manageable. There is a genuine loss in moving beyond these comfortable illusions, even when you recognize them as illusions. The innocent trust in external systems, the easy camaraderie with others who share unquestioned assumptions, the relief of having clear guidelines for success and meaning, all of these must be consciously released as you develop the capacity to navigate reality with expanded perception. But this grief, while real and necessary, obscures a more profound recognition that emerges as the transformation deepens. You begin to understand that what you are losing was never actually yours to begin with. The security you felt within conventional structures was based on agreements that could be withdrawn at any moment. The connections you had with others through shared illusions were fragile, precisely because they depended on maintaining those illusions. The identity you constructed around external achievements was vulnerable, because it relied on circumstances beyond your ultimate control. What emerges in place of these borrowed securities is something far more substantial, though initially far less familiar. You discover that authentic connection is possible with beings who may hold entirely different beliefs, but who share a commitment to truth over comfort. You realize that real security comes not from external arrangements, but from your capacity to respond creatively to whatever circumstances arise. You find that genuine identity is not something you construct, but something you uncover, not a role you perform, but an essence you embody. The destruction that expanded seeing brings is therefore not the ending of something precious, but the removal of obstacles to something even more precious. Like a sculptor who must chip away stone to reveal the form hidden within, the dissolving of limited perception reveals capacities and connections that were always present but previously inaccessible. The pain of this process comes not from losing what is valuable, but from mistaking the temporary for the eternal, the constructed for the natural, the borrowed for the inherent. This perspective allows you to reframe the entire challenge of seeing what others cannot see. Rather than viewing it as a burden that separates you from normal human connection, you can recognize it as an invitation to discover forms of connection that are more authentic, more nourishing, and more sustainable than anything available within conventional awareness. The loneliness you feel is not permanent exile from human community, but a temporary passage through the space between old and new forms of belonging. The key to navigating this passage lies in developing what we might call bilingual consciousness, the ability to function fluently in both ordinary and expanded awareness without losing access to either. This requires a kind of conscious shape-shifting, where you can engage fully with conventional reality when that is appropriate while maintaining your deeper perceptions intact. You learn to speak the language of everyday concerns without forgetting the larger context that gives those concerns their proper proportion. You develop the capacity to care about immediate human needs without losing sight of the eternal dimension that transcends all immediate circumstances. This bilingual consciousness protects you from the two most common errors of expanded perception: spiritual bypassing and ordinary dismissal. Spiritual bypassing occurs when you use your broader awareness to avoid engaging with the legitimate challenges of human existence, when you become so identified with transcendent perspectives that you lose your capacity for practical compassion and effective action. Ordinary dismissal happens when you become so frustrated with the limitations of conventional awareness that you withdraw entirely from ordinary human interaction, creating a kind of self-imposed exile that serves no one. The middle path requires that you honor both dimensions simultaneously, that you remain fully human while accessing transpersonal awareness, that you engage completely with relative reality while never forgetting absolute reality. This integration is not achieved once and then maintained automatically. It requires ongoing attention, constant refinement, and the humility to recognize when you have tilted too far in either direction. As you develop this capacity for bilingual consciousness, something remarkable begins to happen. The very quality of your presence starts to create opportunities for others to glimpse the expanded realities you are perceiving, not through words or explanations, but through the authentic expression of integrated awareness. People begin to sense that you are operating from a different foundation, even if they cannot articulate what that foundation might be. Your way of listening becomes a space where others feel safe to express thoughts and feelings they normally keep hidden. Your responses to ordinary situations carry a quality of depth that invites others to consider perspectives they might not have encountered otherwise. This influence is subtle and often unconscious, but it represents one of the most significant ways that expanded awareness serves collective transformation. Rather than trying to convert others to your particular insights or experiences, you simply embody the integration of those insights in your daily interactions. You become a walking demonstration that it is possible to see more deeply while remaining functionally engaged with ordinary reality. You offer others the implicit permission to explore their own consciousness without abandoning their responsibilities or relationships. The destructive aspect of expanded seeing, therefore, reveals itself to be a particular kind of creative destruction, one that clears space for something more beautiful and functional to emerge. What is destroyed is not your capacity for human connection, but your dependence on unconscious forms of connection. What is dissolved is not your ability to find meaning and purpose, but your reliance on externally defined meanings and purposes. What is abandoned is not engagement with the world, but unconscious engagement that serves systems rather than life. In this light, the title we began with takes on new meaning. Seeing what no one else sees will destroy you, but only in the sense that a seed is destroyed when it becomes a plant, only in the way that a caterpillar is destroyed when it becomes a butterfly. The destruction is not an ending, but a transformation, not a loss, but an evolution, not a mistake, but a natural progression of consciousness toward its own fuller expression. The challenge and the profound gift of this destruction is that it cannot be undone. Once you have seen through the veils that maintain ordinary perception, you cannot simply choose to see them as solid again. Once you have experienced the interconnectedness that underlies apparent separation, you cannot return to the unconscious comfort of believing in absolute independence. Once you have glimpsed the constructed nature of social reality, you cannot participate in those constructions with the same unconscious innocence. But this irreversibility is not a trap, it is a liberation. It frees you from the exhausting effort of maintaining illusions that never served your authentic development. It releases you from the need to perform in ways that contradict your deepest understanding. It allows you to put your energy toward expressions and connections that align with your expanded awareness, rather than fighting against it. The path forward involves learning to trust this process of conscious destruction and conscious creation, recognizing that your expanded perception is not a personal achievement, but a gift that you hold in service to the larger evolution of consciousness itself. Your individual awakening is simultaneously a contribution to collective awakening. Your personal integration is also a form of planetary healing. Your private transformation has public implications, even when those implications remain invisible. This recognition shifts the entire context of the loneliness and challenge that accompany expanded seeing. Instead of experiencing these difficulties as personal problems to be solved, you can recognize them as initiation experiences that prepare you to serve as a bridge between different levels of awareness. The isolation you feel becomes temporary preparation for a form of connection that transcends ordinary social bonds. The confusion you experience becomes necessary disorientation that precedes reorientation at a higher level of organization. Trust the destruction, trust the seeing, trust that your perception, however isolating it may feel in the short term, is part of a larger process of awakening that includes but transcends your individual experience. What is being destroyed in you is also being destroyed in the collective consciousness of humanity, and what is being born through your individual transformation is simultaneously being born in countless others around the world. You are not losing your mind. You are finding a mind that is larger than the one you inherited. You are not losing your connection to reality. You are discovering realities that are more fundamental than the ones you were taught to see. You are not losing your humanity. You are uncovering forms of humanity that are more authentic and more sustainable than those available within conventional awareness. If these reflections on the destructive gift of expanded perception have touched something deep within your own experience, know that you are part of an invisible community of beings who are undergoing similar transformations throughout the world. This community exists parallel to ordinary social structures, connected not by geography or ideology, but by the shared recognition that consciousness is capable of far more than our culture generally acknowledges. By subscribing to this channel, you become part of this network of awakening awareness, a silent community of seekers who understand that spiritual growth often requires the courage to see what others cannot yet see, to feel what others cannot yet feel, to know what others cannot yet know. Each video we share is an offering to this community, a contribution to the collective understanding of how to navigate the challenges and gifts of expanded consciousness with grace and wisdom. We are here not to provide easy answers or comfortable reassurances, but to explore together the complex terrain of authentic awakening, to support each other through the inevitable difficulties of seeing beyond consensus reality, and to celebrate the profound beauty that emerges when consciousness recognizes its own unlimited nature. If you feel called to join this exploration, if you recognize in these words something of your own journey toward expanded awareness, we invite you to subscribe and allow yourself to be nourished by ongoing reflections on the path of conscious evolution. Together, we are weaving a new form of community, one based not on shared beliefs or common backgrounds, but on the mutual recognition of consciousness awakening to itself in countless unique forms. A simple click on the subscribe button is your way of saying yes to this journey, yes to the challenges and gifts of expanded seeing, yes to the community of awakening beings who understand that what appears to be destruction is actually the clearing away of everything that was never real in the first place, making space for what has always been true to finally emerge into the light.